Hi, everyone. Uh, Welcome to this session of Lit for Life. We're going to be talking about good books, writing, reading, and we're hoping that the discussion will be fierce enough so that a few hairs fly and, tempers also do. Let me introduce the panelists today. Everybody knows Markus, Zusak. Is there anyone here who doesn't? This is probably embarrassing him a lot, but anyway. You know all about him. You've attended, many of you must have attended the discussion the conversation he had with Tisani Doshi yesterday. If some of you have checked him out online, you will know that he's had lots of adventures with a naughty brother, and he's done some pretty awful things to him. He's also the person who wrote The Book Thief, which must be probably the most read book by the most number of people in the world. And there are, apparently all the copies have sold out here. So you know who he is now. Then we have Manjula Padmanabhan. Manjula wanted me to tell you that, well, she didn't want me to tell you this, but she was one of the finalists for the prize, the Hindu Literature Prize this year, for her The Island of Lost Girls. But she wanted me to convey that The Island of Lost Girls and the book that she wrote just before that, Escape, are not really books for, not at all books for young adults. Although I feel a little bit differently, I feel they are for readers. So there is a distinction that I'd like to draw there. She has this very, very famous, you know that she's a very well-known cartoonist and illustrator, playwright. Her play Harvest won the Aristotle Onassis Prize many years ago. She has this wonderful character called Suki. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Suki. She's been appearing for several months now in the Hindu business line. Sukiyaki is what the column is called. And she has lots to say about a lot of things. And although Manjula would have us Suki, yes, and Manjula as well, although she would like to have us believe that she's very demure and very, very, quiet. Then we have Anil Menon. Anil Menon is really a man of many parts. He is basically a scientist. He is now a writer, and he marries his passion for science with a passion for writing. He actually, he's an, academic type geek, if I can call him that. He actually does something with evolutionary algorithms, whatever that is. His book too, Half of What I Say, was shortlisted for the Literary Prize this year. He says that when he was young, he wasn't much of a reader. When he was little, he wasn't much of a reader until about the age of 15, when he happened to read Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, right? And that kind of changed his life. And from being a non-reader, he became a writer. So there you are, you have your panel today. And we will talk about, basically, we would like to talk about writing for young adults, but we will probably be talking about a lot of other things as well. Started off with a fundamental question. Do you think a segment such as young adult, writing for young adults is justified? Or is it just one of those, segments that we could do without? Is it artificially created? Is there a place for it in India? Who would like to go first?
I'm the only one here not from here, so I can't really answer.
So all over the world, yes, and let's give it a global perspective.
Okay, so I came up as a young adult writer because when I was 16 when I tried to write my first book, and that book, I mean, all 8 pages of that book could be entered into a competition for the worst book ever written. And it was about a boy who had some sort of cyst in his head and that could explode at any time. And by 8 pages, I didn't have anything left. See how I've already gone off the topic? And so on the 8th page, he just exploded. And that was the end of the book. But you've got to start somewhere. But I was already I knew I was writing about a teenage protagonist, and so maybe I wouldn't be here today if there wasn't a young adult category. And so I know at home a lot of people say, "Oh, I've written a book," and people say, "Oh, what sort of book is it?" And they say, "Oh, it's just a young adult book." And I say, "Oh, well, you should take the just out of that question, out of that statement. You've written a young adult book." And I think for me, I've loved coming up through that category, whereas at the same time, I also want to say, who cares if it's a young adult book or if it's an adult book? Well, any of us could get up here now and tell a story, and if it's a great story, you'll walk away going, geez, what a great story. But you won't walk away going, that was a really great science fiction, drama, comedy. You won't put it into a category. You'll just say that was a great story, but as soon as we put it on paper, we want to put a category on it. And I don't know, I think, okay, at home, my kids, every couple of years at school, they have to do this exam, and it's a really, everyone says it's a really evil exam. It's called the NAPLAN exam. I don't know what NAPLAN stands. It stands for something. I don't even know what it stands for. But everyone complains about it. And sometimes I think it's good that we have it just so that we all have something to complain about. And sometimes, so I think it's good to have a category so that then you can transcend the category or go outside the category or push the boundaries of the category, but not because you want to, but just because you're doing what you were made to do, and that is to write books and to write beautiful books. And I know for me, I sit down and I say, what's my job here? My job is to try to write somebody's favourite book. And I'm not saying my job is to write a really good young adult book, because then I've already lost. Okay? My job is just to write something to have that higher ambition, which is to transcend the category. My favourite books, I have all my books at home in fiction, non-fiction, and all sorts of categories, but some books defy the category, and they're my favourite books, and they sit on the top shelf, and that's the kind of book that I want to write. But that doesn't mean I don't think the categories should be there at all. So you can make out of that whatever you want. I hope I made sense. It wasn't worth any applause, though.
You got the applause anyway. I would say that I was surprised when I first encountered the category young adult, because I always thought it was slightly make-believe, a little artificial, because certainly when I was a child, I read whatever I wanted to read, reading forward, reading over the boundary of what was given to me to read. And because my sisters were a lot older than me, I read what was already in the house. And I thought the books that my parents read, that the adults in the house read, looked extraordinarily boring, and I just was not interested in them. So I found myself reading whatever I wished to read, and I think I would have found it odd to be told that, no, you have now entered the category of young adult. So it's been quite recent that publishers have suggested writing for this category. And when I've looked at it, I think what I have used as a way of demarcating between children's writing for children and writing for adults, and that's in between is writing for people who know about sex, but you can't write in too much detail. And they are interested, but it's as an adult one knows. I would prefer not to write in great salacious detail. So I'm aware that yes, there is that twilight world between child and adult, and one can play with it. It's a flavor one can play with, and whereas I can see that, I don't think that I've written a great deal for that age group.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me? Yes. So I think categories are useful. They help us discover the kind of books that we're interested in reading. So in that sense, they're not without use. And I think there's a reason why marketing has come up with them. So you go to a bookstore and you know where to look. Libraries have categories forever, right? So taxonomies are useful. I think the danger is that we begin to take them seriously, too seriously. So if you have a person who reads science fiction books, they'll say, I just read science fiction. You say, why not? Why don't you read other stuff? But they see themselves as science fiction readers. So they may not read detective novels, or they may not read literary fiction, or they may not read romance novels. So these categories assume a life of their own, and they become prisons rather than agents of discovery. There was this 11th century text by this Jain scholar called Jayarasi. And the name of the text is, if I remember it correctly, Tattva Paplava Simha, which basically translates to the lion which devours all categories. And the lion that devours all categories is skepticism. So I think we should be skeptical about these categories. There's a tendency for classification of labor to become classification of laborers. So a science fiction writer, there's no such thing as a science fiction writer. There's only a writer who writes science fiction. But that distinction is often lost when we read blurbs and so on. So I deny that I'm a science fiction writer, but I write science fiction. I deny that I'm a literary writer, but I write literary fiction. I think it's an important distinction to keep in mind. But other than that, I'm all for categories.
Well, that was an interesting point that you raised, which takes us to another thing that we were debating while we sat in the author's lounge, talking about what we were going to talk about. And that is, while denying not categories, but the need for categories, let's assume, okay, we do have this category now, and that's what we're talking about now. Does that mean then it comes with a whole set of boundaries? Does it come, it comes with a definition of that category. And as a children's books editor for several years, this is something that we've often had to discuss. We've always found that in the market somehow, there were and there are always books for girls to, these crossover books from childhood to adulthood, some crossover books, some romances, some things that help them perhaps understand how they were growing up, understand even their sexuality, understand a lot of things. But there are in fact no such, or there are very few such books for boys. So, in that sense, having a category like this helps. But such categories are also defined by certain boundaries, which means, in other words, are there things that are acceptable and are there things that are not acceptable? Are there taboos? Do we need to have taboos? And what role do taboos play in helping the cause of young adult books or doing the opposite?
Sandhya, I'd like you to talk about your statement that in your view there should be no taboos, because we talked about this, we have a little bit of a disagreement, and I thought Sandhya's views were definitely worth sharing?
Well, it's quite simple. We live in a world where social media and all forms of electronic media, all forms of life, in fact, lie exposed before everybody. We cannot protect anybody from anything. And living in such a world, let's not pretend that our children know this and they don't know this. Very often they know very much more than you and I do, certainly more than I do. Therefore, I honestly believe that even when it comes to small children, and I write for small children, I don't believe in taboos. I don't believe there are subjects you simply cannot discuss. Everything depends upon how you discuss that subject, how you write that story. Everything depends upon that emotional bond, that link that you make with your reader, with each individual reader. And that's where, you know, all the writers' abilities and sensitivities and powers of communication, imagination, all these come into play.
That settles that one then.
No, it cannot be the last word, please. We'd like to hear from all of you about.
Oh, okay, from my point of view, I don't even have anything to say about this because I don't even think of censorship ever. It doesn't even cross my mind. And so I have enough trouble just trying to get the story to work and the characters right before I start thinking, oh no, is this a taboo or is this... And usually it's not anyway. So, often I can't think of any examples, so it's not even fair of me to say this, but sometimes you'll come across someone trying to be very provocative, almost just to seek attention, which is the dangerous side of there being so-called no taboos, and then it just becomes, to me, a little on the dull side. And so it's just tell a really, really good story. Just right, like, and that's the job, and that's, you know, that you can be highly ambitious, and the idea of taboos and subjects should never even come into it as far as I'm concerned. When you're in the act of writing, it's just make this story great, make the story stand up, and then it doesn't matter what your subject is. And that to me is the goal of the writer. How does, you know, someone asked me earlier today about that, and saying that, yeah, people were telling her to cut back on things a little bit because I think her message in the books were too heavy-handed. I was so like, yeah, get the story right. Get the story right, and to hell with all the taboos. And that's your job. Tell a really, really great story.
Listening to both of you, I realize that I guess I sort of self-censor a great deal because for whatever reason, I'm extremely conscious that in certain cultures or in certain markets, I can get away with one thing, and in another market I can't. And it's hard for me to explain here in a simple, straightforward way how I respond to the sense that I need to be, well, for instance, to give you a small instance, while drawing my comic strip Suki, which appears in Business Line on Saturdays, the strip is colored, and my characters are Indian, and I am constantly battling the desire to color them dark because I am dark, but I'm already aware that the Indian readers don't really like to see dark-skinned characters. They're less willing, less likely to read the comic strip if the characters are dark-skinned. So I find I'm constantly altering very tiny increments the color of the skin of my characters. So that's a kind of censorship. I am self-censoring because I'm conscious of the reception of my character. And in that sense, I feel there is a continuous adjustment for audience. I know that if my audience is going to be very critical of outspoken female characters, I will be conscious how I present my argument. I'm not saying that I will say something different or consciously hold back on the truth, but I will certainly adjust my language. And again, for young children, I will definitely adjust my language so that there is less profanity or no profanity. And in that sense, yes, I recognize boundaries.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Manjula here in the sense that I think it's not taboos as so much as conventions. We call it civilization actually. For example, if you look at the old film stories, Hindi film stories, you will find that there is a poor character, a servant, whose sole function in the movie is to hang around serving the rich people. And when the rich people get into trouble, emotional trouble, the poor guy will come and offer some insight. Malik choti muva badi baat, that kind of thing. And he'll offer some funda that will clear up the problem. That's his function in life, right? And the idea of using the poor to always provide enlightenment for the upper classes is a version of how the minority character serves to offer some insight for the white character in a variety of movies, right? The sidekick, for example, is always some minority character. And as we go ahead, we find that we begin to question these conventions and we begin to stop doing things the way we used to do them. And it's part of good storytelling in that the older forms become bad storytelling. It's a way of not recognizing people. So we find that today's movies are much more diverse than they used to be 50 years ago. And that is a good thing. And it's not really self-censorship as much as reflecting the ways in which the world has changed. So that there are certain ways of seeing and certain ways of saying and certain ways of doing that writers don't see or say or do these days. And I think that is fine. The problem again is when it goes too far. So for example, in the US, now if we teach courses, we must attach, say, trigger warnings, just in case there are audience members who can't handle the text, right? Yeah. So for example, if you're teaching Lolita, there might be people who have been sexually abused in the class, and they might find the text too sensitive, too provocative. So you have to attach a warning to Lolita saying that this text might cause you to react in uncontrollable ways. Now, it's not that the writer wants it, or it's not that the teacher wants it, it's something that the society has begun to demand. So the question comes, to what extent do we allow these civilizational controls on the writer? And so I think it's one of those things that must be debated. As writers, we must constantly push for saying as much as we can. But at the same time, we must also realize that the world is changing. And the ways in which we used to do things also have to change. So certain kinds of stories can no longer be told. And that's just one of the facts of life,
Okay, I think this is getting hot. But before that, if you have questions for any of the panelists, maybe it's a good idea for just write it down on a piece of paper in a way that one of us can read it, and because we'd like to devote a little extra time to questions from the audience, okay? Then you can pass them down to the volunteers and we'll take them up, all right? Okay, like I said, it's getting hot. So are you suggesting then the writer is a teacher?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm just saying that he or she lives in a society, and that automatically places some constraints on that person. And if you are at all alive, you write according to those constraints. You may break them once in a while, but you should be conscious that you're breaking them. The idea that we are just telling a story is not entirely true. We are always telling a story in the context of the societies in which we grew up. So those influences will always be there. And it's best to be conscious that these influences exist, and we are writing within that context. So the perfect freedom is an illusion, in short.
I'd like to hear from both of you about that.
I've just told Markus that he should answer that.
Yeah, and that made me miss the last bit of what he was saying. Yeah, I don't know. The storyteller as teacher, I agree. But I also make the fundamental point that that's never where you start. And I think the danger, and and some of the more terrible, actually, I mean, I don't pick up. I don't want you to get the idea that I pick up books and go, oh God, I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. But the ones that do make me feel that way a little bit is the ones where I can smell immediately that someone has picked up a topic and gone, now I'm going to write something about this topic that's going to change your life or change your opinion. And those books never work for me. I think as a writer, yes. I think the way I think of it is if you write something strong enough, the meaning will be there. The teaching will be there, but you just can't come and teach it. I mean, that's the teacher's job. And in a lot of ways, it's the teacher's job to find meaning in the text. And so I always, you've got to look at it from that point of view, that, all right, here I am, I've got to write this book and I've got to cobble it together and put the layers in it and enough layers of meaning from the point of view of the characters and the story that people will learn something from it. And if they don't, that's okay too, because you say, yeah, I wasn't trying to teach you anything anyway, and I was just trying to tell you a good story. But you find it in every good book or film or whatever it is, that the meaning is there if the story holds up. And that's always the way I approach it.
So there are teachable moments everywhere. When we talk about books for younger children, for instance, we specifically talk about teachable moments, especially in the context of India, where literacy levels are very low, and we're getting more children to read, and then we're trying to get teachers to read first, and then teachers to teach children to read. So all of this becomes relevant and important. But I take your point, and I think I agree with you, that you don't start there. So to come to a very much more fundamental question, a question that most people would ask their favorite authors or any author, why do you write? And I'd like to hear from all of you.
Well, we came to this point in our discussion, and for me, this is a question that journalists will, especially very young journalists, will ask. I've often been asked, so why do you write? And I really resist this question, because if someone has approached me because they already know I'm a writer, then to ask me why I write is to, you don't ask a doctor why they're a doctor. And it's, for me, I'm a writer and an artist, it's one of the ways I formed myself. I mean, I don't say I'm a woman, I say I'm a writer and an artist. And I feel that that's valid. And to be asked why is a bit like being asked, why are you a woman? It's my definition. So I can't be asked a why, like why is your skin brown? It's me, and I keep shrugging, trying not to shrug. But I find that question it's too fundamental. It's like asking, how do I define myself? And I feel in a sense, I answer that with everything I write. The why is there, is answered, I believe, in the way that if and I hope, of course, I hope I engage the reader, then by the end of my books, they should know why.
Okay, can I just amend that question then? Whom do you write for?
No, that was one of the questions I actually know the answer to. So I'm happy to answer the original question. There are a couple of different answers to the there's sort of a glib answer and a more serious answer and maybe one in between. But So when I sit down and work, not so much anymore, but I used to write a lot and listen to music at the same time. And I'd put my favourite CD in, that's how old I am. I'd put my favourite CD in and I'd start writing, and of course you put your favourite CD in, what are you waiting for? Your favourite song on the CD. And then I would sit and I would write and I'd work, and then next thing, after 20 minutes, for about 20 minutes I'd realised, it's quiet. And the whole CD had played, and I didn't even notice that it had finished, and I didn't even hear my favourite song. That's why I'm a writer. And the other reason is that I'm not good at anything else, and also if I don't write, I'm just cranky and miserable. And I'm cranky and miserable when I'm writing too, don't get me wrong, but I'm more cranky and more miserable when I haven't been writing, when I should have been writing, and that's also why I'm a writer. But also, and this is the last reason, is every now and again, I'll tell you my favourite line from a book. Now there's a book, it won the Pulitzer Prize, so you can, if you forget the name of the book, just look up the Pulitzer Prize from, all the winners. But a book, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, by Michael Chabon. And there's a line in that book that describes a big ocean liner coming into New York Harbour. And it comes in, and the narrator describes it like this. He says, "The Rotterdam came into New York Harbour like a mountain wearing a dinner jacket." And that to me is like a writer who's sitting in a sand pit, just playing. And he didn't know, and I would bet my hands that he didn't know he was going to write that line when he got out of bed that morning. And it's those, you do all this hard work and it's not working, and you're throwing your book out all the time, or the pages you've written, you're working so hard, and then you write a sentence like that, and you say to yourself, this whole week, this whole month was worth it just to write that sentence. And so I think it's just for those moments of joy amongst the misery. That's all, that makes us all want to be writers as well.
Yeah, so I often meet readers, and I'm always surprised because I don't remember writing for that particular person, So I don't think I know very well who I write for, whom I write for. But I think I do have an idea of the why, perhaps. So I find that I lose interest in ideas if it's already been done. So I'm guessing that I write novels, I write stories, if I feel that no one's told it before in that exact same way that I intend to tell it. So it's basically looking for a certain way of telling a story that no one's ever done before. One of a kind tellings. And that keeps me going. Yeah.
So we have questions here, several questions. So I think I will take those up, right? The first one is for Anil. This person asks, Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder is a brilliant short story that has managed to create a balance between science and philosophy. Is that why it inspired you?
I was 15 years old, so I wasn't thinking in those terms. But it was a time travel story. And it's basically the story of a guy who goes back in time, and I think he steps on a butterfly or steps on some kind of insect. And when he returns, he finds that the entire history of the world has changed. So it's basically the butterfly effect. And I'd read a lot of fiction before that, but it's usually the usual stuff, Anil Blyton, Hardy Boys, that kind of thing. Panchatantra tales, Mahabharata, Ramayana, that kind of stuff. And this was qualitatively different. It played with concepts that are not considered variable, things like time travel. I never heard of time travel before that, so it was fascinating. But rereading that story many years later, I liked it a lot less.
That's a huge disappointment.
Yeah. So I must have stepped on something in the past, because that story is really about a safari hunt. And what this guy wants to do in the past is to go shoot dinosaurs. And I was thinking that is that the best Ray Bradbury could do with time travel? Go on a safari hunt with in the past, But that's a separate issue.
Okay. Okay, this one's for Markus. I've heard you rewrote The Book Thief over 100 times. How did you finally know it was finished? It's a lovely question.
Yeah, and I think you can apply it to any book, and I think everyone on this panel can answer this question. It's not only for me. I think there's a point where you realise that if you do anything more to it, that you're going to start hurting it, and you're not fixing it anymore. And I also think, you might start drifting off a lot more. And I think I've finally, and 100 times working on The Book Thief is nothing. The book I've been working on now, literally thousands and thousands of times over the last decade that I worked even just on the first 50 pages. Where it just got too much. And now it hasn't changed that much. And so I think I'm more sometimes I think now, and I look at a book like The Book Thief, and I think there are so many things that are wrong with that book. It's not a perfect book by any means, but it's somehow the right book. And I know I went too far sometimes, but maybe if I didn't go too far sometimes, I wouldn't have gone far enough at others. And so I think it's easier to look back after a little bit more time, and you can see the faults, that are there. But I think, the idea is not to make something perfect sometimes, but to make it right. And you can make it more perfect, but not more right. And so sometimes you have to say that just feels right, so I'm going to leave it. And one of my favourite musicians is Neil Young, and sometimes you listen to a record of his, and you can hear a fault in it. And the thing is, he knows it's there. And you sort of go, well, if it's all right for Neil Young, it's all right for me. And you've got to be in the spirit of it.
This one's for you, Manjula. If you hold back, or if you are conscious about your work, won't it affect your work and the final outcome? And as artists and writers, aren't we supposed to be harbingers of change?
Yes, of course we could be harbingers of change. But I've always been conscious of boundaries. And I think we, just to give you an example, for me, as an artist, I have a page or I have a canvas and there's a boundary to it. And I enjoy that boundary. It gives me that space. I have that space and only that space to invest everything in. There's an infinity in that boundary. That's what I enjoy about boundaries. Because, our own lives are bounded. We're bounded by death. And we have the space of this short life. And it can be an infinite life for some.
That's a smart one.
Yeah, that was a great answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, this is a general question. A general comment more like. Maybe the last one, and before one final question for all of you. This is about taboos and categorizing. If the book has some taboo moments, can't those books be differently categorized, like not for children? For instance, Indian epics have abridged versions for young readers that sort of edit out sexual content. So it's just a comment from one of the audience. Okay, one final round of questions. Simple. No.
I just want to I'd like to answer that one.
Oh.
Sometimes when you say that this is not for children, that is a guarantee. It's going to be read. I read Lady Chatterley's Lover, as soon as I could. So it's a marketing trick.
Okay, final question before we wind up, and then, after this, the winners of the Children's Books Awards the names will be announced. I'd like each of you to tell us what your favorite books are.
Oh, I have several. What I'll do is I think I'll just talk about the book that made me want to be the books that made me want to be a writer, and it was when I was a young adult, and they were considered young adult books. So, and they were the books by S.C. Hinton, and she wrote The Outsiders, and I read that when I was 14, and it wasn't that book, but one of her later books that I read called Taming the Star Runner that made me want to be a writer. But Rumblefish, I think, is her masterpiece. and it's such a short book, but it's spot on. And but I remember when I was reading those books, I thought I just had that feeling where I didn't notice the pages were turning, and I knew this was all made up and all untrue and just fiction, but I was believing it, and I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to be able to, just that trick of reading fiction and you know it's not true, but you believe it, that kind of magic act. And I thought, and I almost sounded like a movie villain where I thought, I want to do that and nothing is going to stop me. And that was when I tried to, a few years later, write my first book. And she was 16 when she published her first book. And I was 16 and I wrote 8 pages. And but you got to start somewhere.
We are often asked this question, which is our favorite book or our 10 favorite books. And since I've filled out a number of those lists, I know what the top of my pops are, and as a young person, absolutely and forever was Alice in Wonderland, and specifically Alice Through the Looking Glass. I find that many of us read Wonderland and we don't read The Looking Glass, and I think The Looking Glass is it's a hallucination. It is so rich and so extraordinary, especially if you happen to get the edition with the original drawings. They anticipate LSD in every way. They are incredible, and I just, I think that really lit me, those books. The science fiction book, which really turned me on, I read Tarzan when I was 11 and 12, and I adored Tarzan, but the one that turned me towards science fiction was a book called Have Spacesuit Will Travel. And it was not just time travel, but it involved a pair of identical twins where one twin stayed on Earth and the other twin went in space. And the twin in space he aged at a different rate. And the thing about twins was, identical twins, at least in the book, they had discovered that they could, they had a certain telepathy. It worked better than the radio, so they could communicate across distances. But as an adult, I would say across the range of books, I have the one book that has appeared again and again on my list is John Fowles' The Magus. I adore The Magus. Again, I don't know whether this is a theme, but it's like an extraordinarily surreal and very moral and yet incredibly transgressory story about knowing yourself and knowing the world, and a kind of cycle, an incredible cycle.
For me, the one of the story, I can't call it a novel as much as a story, has been the Mahabharata. And I read it in the best possible way. I had an uncle who was a lawyer, and he decided to defend the Kauravas. So as I was reading the story, he would keep pointing out why Duryodhan was right, why Arjun was wrong, and he would stage these law cases in which he would prove that Krishna was in the error, So it is a great book to be exposed in that particular manner, in which there's a standard reading, and then you have this person coming and telling you that actually it's the other way around. And that book has remained at the centerpiece of my imagination for quite a while. It was Shakespeare. The way I think about it is, it was Shakespeare before Shakespeare became Shakespeare. It's this grand tale. But the other book, a genuine novel, is Chaim Potok's The Chosen. And it's the story of the friendship of these two boys growing up in Brooklyn just after the Second World War. One of the boys is a son of a Reformed Jew, and the other one is the son of a Hasidic Jew. And it's this lovely tale of the friendship of two boys. And at that time, I didn't really have a best friend, but it made me want to have one. And that book, it's one of those sweet books with no great drama, lots of discussion, and it tells a damn great story. That's the other book that comes to mind. Yeah.
Well, I have to share mine as well. I have several favorite books, but I think one that has stood the test of time, one among several, that I read when I was very young, and I can read it today and still enjoy it, savor it, is Paul Gallico's Love of $7.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I can never forget the way the story opens. I mean, it's there in my visual memory. I can see it right now. Thank you for all the questions you sent up. We couldn't ask all the questions that you asked because of time, and it's a wrap is what we're being told, and I know that the prizes are going to be announced now. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Markus, Manjula, and Anil. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you.